All right, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, everybody out there, this is our third group, our 2 p.m. group for the Congressional Forum, the Congressional debate for Don Young's seat. And we are just going to go ahead and start it off. For the third group, we're going to start with opening statements, which will be 90 seconds long, a minute and a half. So let me pull up my timer here, and we will go ahead and begin. As far as technical difficulties, it looks like everyone is just fine, and we are ready to rock and roll. So this is my last day as senator, this ASUAF senator. I'm George Thomas, and I've got the president of the school sitting right next to me, and we've got the Senate chair and an office behind us. So we are going to rock and roll, and here we go. So to start off is opening statements, and Robert Bob Lyons, you have the floor for a minute and a half, sir. You are recognized.
Hi, my name's Bob Lyons. I'm a military brat, been all around the U.S., came up here with my dad as a child, lived in Delta out at Fort Greely, went up to Fairbanks, went out there out west, worked in the airlines through my 20s, came here to the Valley about 15 years ago, drove truck. Got a degree in psychology, moved on from that, became a case manager, and now I want to change some things after these mandates happened and all the events of the last couple of years. I think we need to change direction and maybe leave where we are as a state, get out of our adolescence, grow further, make some changes, evolve a little bit. So here I am. Nice to meet you.
You're on mute, Mr. Thomas.
Well, it was going too well the last two debates. All right, so next up we have Mike Milligan. You are recognized for a minute and a half, sir. You have the floor. Going once. Going twice. All right, next up, J.R. Myers. You are recognized for 90 seconds for opening statements. You have the floor, sir.
Okay, thank you, George, and UAF Senate for sponsoring this. I think it's a very exciting venue. I'm glad to be a part of it. I think it's a historic event. I think Alaska is breaking ground here with this election. I think it's a good thing. Anyway, I have been involved with Alaska politics for many years. In many parties, a lot of people have been criticizing me for my involvement in many parties, but I've been involved with the Republican Party, the Alaskan Independence Party, the Constitution Party, and the Libertarians. So I don't see that as a bad thing, but as a good thing because it's coalition building in my mind. And I've also been involved in a lot of boards serving the community in nonprofit and other community service ways. I've also served locally in the Haynesboro and in the Kenai Peninsula Borough. So my family has ties that go back generations in Alaska, and I just think I'm a suitable candidate to serve all Alaskans because of my history and my experience and my family ties and my love for Alaska. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Myers. Up next, Robert Ornelius. Robert, are you on the call? Going once, going twice. All right, next up we have Silvio Pellegrini. You are recognized for a minute and a half, sir.
Thank you, sir. I'd like to start off by thanking everyone for attending this conference and yourself, George. So I have been in service of this nation since I was about 16 years old when I joined the service and delayed enlistment, and I shipped out and been active duty, a reservist. I'm actually still in that reserve capacity for the United States military, the Air Force, as an intelligence analyst. And in that capacity, I've had a lot of purview to how this nation functions in the global platform. And I'd like to bring Alaska to that platform as well. I feel there's a lot of shortcomings with career politicians and legacies that Alaskans are kind of fed up with. I feel like I can bring that to the table. The Article 1 of the Constitution, Section 2 says that a representative only needs to be 25, a U.S. citizen for the last 7 years, and a resident of that state. I was born in Michigan as a Badger, but I'm raising myself and my kids here in Alaska as Bears. And I feel like I can resonate with a lot of messages that people in Alaska have with the system, with the politicians, the lifetime politicians and the politics that kind of drag things out and not getting action done. With the rest of that, I yield my time.
Thank you, sir. Up next, we have Josh Revak. Josh, are you on the call? Going once, going twice. David Thistle is 5 minutes. He's coming in right now, so we're going to wait for him and push that one back. Joe Woodward. Joe Woodward, are you on the call? Do we have? Okay, here we go. That's her calling in, right? Is that? Okay, so I'm going to read what she has to say. This is from Joe Woodward. I'm a U.S. citizen and lived in Alaska for 10 years and have given my input in local, state, and national levels of government. So thank you very much, Ms. Woodward. Adam Wool, you are recognized for 1.5 minutes, good sir. You have the floor.
Thanks, George. And thanks for hosting this event. It's very important. I know with 40 or 50 candidates in the race, it's hard to get everyone together. Can you hear me okay? Okay.
You're good, sir. You're good.
My name's Adam Wool. I'm currently in my office in Juneau. I'm skipping a finance meeting, but don't tell anyone right now. But I've been down in Juneau for 8 years, serving as a representative, representing District 5 in Fairbanks. Lived in Fairbanks for 40 years. This is my 40th year coming up right now. Moved up from Boston area, came to Alaska. My brother was living here. He was a school teacher in rural Alaska. And long story short, I ended up staying, doing various things, including finishing my degree at UAF. I got a degree in physics. Intermittently with that, I started a lot of businesses, including Hot Licks Ice Cream in Fairbanks. I owned the Marlin, and I started the Blue Loon, which I just sold a few years ago. So I had 3 successful businesses for 25, 30 years, all in all, and was persuaded to run for office come down to Juneau and represent District 5. Never done it before. Didn't really know if I wanted to do it, but once I got into it and realized that they need people like me down here, sort of regular people that know how to, balance a checkbook, do some payroll, interface with a lot of people and try to get things done. And so I've had a pretty successful run, 8 years, 4 elections. And my district is, I would say, purple. In 2016, my district voted for Donald Trump, but also voted for me. I got more votes than Trump, but I won in my district. So I'm not from what you'd call a progressive or liberal district, that's for sure.
Thank you, Mr. Wool. Thank you. Next up for the 90 seconds, we have Stephen Wright. Stephen, you are recognized for 90 seconds, sir.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, you're good. Go ahead.
All right, I'm Stephen Wright, and I'm running. This is my second time to run for U.S. Congress. I was born on Anchorage Air Force Base, Elmendorf Air Force Base in Anchorage, Alaska. I ran for Congress back in 2016. I went to a Trump rally, and I was inspired by Trump. I went to Vegas in December 14, 2015. And then I chose to run. I filed last minute. I've run for office a couple times since then. I ran for lieutenant governor a couple years ago, got a little over 4,000 votes. And then I also ran, when I ran against Young the first time that I ran for office, got a little over 10,000 votes in the primary. So I've been able to go through the process and to visit people in different parts of the state, to hear what they're saying, what they want their representative to do and be to represent them. And so that is one of the things that I'm striving to do, is to represent the people of Alaska. We have several items that are costing the state of Alaska, from the Jones Act to it's costing us about $5,000 per person. And there's a lot of things that the U.S. representative can do in behalf of the people. And I have 4 things that I've outlined that I'll discuss during this debate.
Thank you very much, Stephen Wright. Next up, we have Mary Peltola. Mary, you have the floor for 1.5 minutes.
Thank you, George. I'm a Yupik Eskimo from Bethel. I'm a salmon advocate and a Democratic former state legislator from Bethel. I'm a mother of 4 and stepmom to 3, 2 of whom are working on their degrees through the University of Alaska. This summer, we'll be sending an Alaskan to Congress to shoulder the heavy responsibilities of championing our interests in the federal government and bringing money back home. I've spent my life working for Alaska and Alaskans. During my 10 years in the state legislature, I helped rebuild and chaired the Bush Caucus, which passed legislation and influenced budgets that improve lives in rural Alaska. I was a champion for K through 12 education, as well as a champion for university funding and a staunch advocate in the legislature to ensure that our satellite campuses have the resources that they need. Recently, as executive director to the Kuskokwim River Intertribal Fish Commission, I helped lead 118 tribes and rural Alaskans in advocacy protecting salmon runs in Western Alaska. Alaskans are a diverse people with a common future. We need thoughtful and courageous public servants who know how to bring us together. As the only rural candidate with legislative experience and the sole Democratic Alaska Native woman in this race, I'm uniquely suited to work for all Alaskans in Congress. I'm happy to be with you here today, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Mary. And we were having technical difficulties, but we have David Thistle. And so David, thank you for joining us, and you are recognized for 1.5 minutes, sir.
Yeah, good morning. How are you today? Well, most people know that I'm not currently an Alaskan. I live out of state in California currently. I guess the Dixie Chicks would call me the traveling soldier. That would be their song for me. I pretty much moved all over the world for this ungrateful nation. I retired twice from the Navy in a wheelchair, not just once, but twice. Everyone wants to say that, you know, Alaska this and Alaska rural that, but let's be real, folks. This is about a seat in Congress. And currently we're at ipso facto war with Russia. The president right now wants to give $33 billion to the Ukraine. That $33 billion could be used on domestic issues currently right here at home and in Alaska. 33 billion. Let's think about that. How much better off would Alaska be with a good chunk of that money? Just in the last few years, I returned 1.95 billion HUD monies to the U.S. government from Texas because they were using it for human trafficking. I've caught 6 states altering the Constitution for the requirements of U.S. House of Representatives for the upcoming midterm, and I've reported that to the federal government. We also need to think about this, folks. Fentanyl has killed 60,000 people in the United States in 1 year.
Thank
That's
you.
more than what died in Vietnam, but thank you for your time.
Thank you. All right. So like I alluded to before, the questioning, we're going to go down the list in alphabetical order, but starting with a new person each time down the list. So Robert Bob Lyons opened it up for the opening statements. So we are going to start for question 1 with J.R. Myers. So Mr. Myers, question 1. Besides the bill to name the post office in Fort Yukon after Don Young, what would be the nature and gist of your first 3 pieces of legislation? You have a minute, sir.
All right, thank you. Well, my campaign is based on the ideas of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So everything would be related to those core concepts. The Constitution is a very central document that we need to uphold. I would intend to uphold that. And part of that would be freedom from mandatory disclosure of vaccination status, no vax passports, no social credit system, that kind of thing, protection, the right to be forgotten on the internet, that sort of thing. We're going far too deep into a police state, surveillance state, and we must stop it now. I would say no more deficit spending, stop the printing presses. We need to implement universal debt forgiveness before we're all relegated to debt servitude and our descendants as well. And then I would strongly advocate for overall congressional prerogatives to be reasserted and to stop rule by executive order. Is that my time limit? Thank you.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Myers. All right. Up next, your first 3 pieces of legislation. Silvio Pellegrini, you are recognized for a minute, sir.
To clarify, the question is the first three pieces of legislation, correct?
Well, the full question is, besides the bill to name the post office in Fort Yukon after Don Young, what would be the nature and gist of your first three pieces of legislation?
Absolutely, that's an easy one. I pretty much run on a anti-establishment platform regarding career politicians. So the first piece would be ensuring that we introduce bills for term limits for congressmen. The second would be separating money and financial interests and personal interests from both the individual, the congressman, and all elected and appointed officials. That includes in all branches of government. So that'd be insulating them from undue influence. The third would be more Alaskan based, and that's to bring home and protect our fishing and wildlife. And that's by protecting and enabling our trawlers to be monitored. Right now, we only monitor about 10% of the trolling. And as a result, the bycatch kills tons of fish. That's hurting small fishermen like Captain John out of Seward, right? So all these pieces right here, all three of these pieces affect us at a national level and at a local level, but they're very easy. They're very easy anti-establishment, pieces that change the system and how we do business as politicians.
Very good. Thank you very much. Up next, we have David Thistle. David, you are recognized for 1 minute, sir.
Yes, good afternoon. The first piece of legislation I would make is I'd reclassify synthetic opioids like fentanyl into a chemical weapon. There's 60,000 deaths this year alone from fentanyl. I believe that's justified. There's less deaths in the entire Vietnam War on the Vietnam Wall than we had from fentanyl in 1 year. The second thing I would do is modify New Hampshire Title 12, Section 165(5), because 1/3 of all homelessness in America are veterans, and that homelessness affects Alaska negatively from the lower 48 states. Any homeless veteran is unacceptable. None of that is acceptable. The third thing I would do is address the border issue. I would really like to sit down and create new legislation in Congress to address the immigration that's happening in the United States. Unless we get a handle on this, we're not going to be able to balance the budget properly.
Thank you very much, Mr. Thistle. All right, up next, we have Joe Woodward, and Ms. Woodward is typing her responses into the chat. So her answer for this question is, my campaign is titled Visions and Changes, if I had a campaign per se. So thank you, Ms. Woodward. Up next is Adam Wool. Mr. Wool, you are recognized for 1 minute. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you. Introducing bills I don't take very lightly, and it's not something you can just do easily, as Ms. Peltola knows from being a legislator. But I think your question basically is, what priorities would we have in DC? But after naming the airport, I'd like to see UA get its full land complement. They've only got about 30%, and they're owed about 360,000 acres. Our delegation's been working on that for a while, and I think that's something we should pursue. I like the infrastructure bill that just passed and has a lot of good things, especially for Alaska. It's for broadband and water and sewer in rural Alaska and things like that. But I'd like to see some kind of overarching energy bill, because I think that's something we have to deal with not only in Alaska, but nationally. Alaska has a lot of energy resources that are untapped, including our natural gas reserves that are quite plentiful, but we can't really get them to market or to our own citizens. The North Slope gas is what I'm talking about. Also, energy as far as renewables and non-carbon producing, and that's really important. So, if there's some sort of a national energy bill that could address all these things. I know it's a big omnibus bill, and again, I probably wouldn't be authoring it, but I would support those kind of things. Nuclear energy is also something we need to deal with. So I'm supportive of that. Is that big noise? Is that the time is up bell?
Yeah, the time is up bell, and then I have the power hammer, the gavel. So
was pounding
you
on a
hear me
wall
making
there.
noise. That's probably why. Let me bounce back to what Joe Woodward was writing in the chat, and then Stephen Wright, you'll be up. So she said, my campaign is titled Vision Changes, if I had a campaign per se, more green in our food, market businesses and distribution packaging, offering high school students college credits during summer school, and lastly, energy package, an energy package geared more towards turbine, solar, and thermal energy, leaving fossil fuels. Thank you. So Ms. Woodward is going to be typing these in. So I'll be reading it when Cole, our Senate chair, is running the questions in the debate. He'll be reading them, and same with President Ashlyn Espinosa. So just to give everyone a heads up on when we get to Joe Woodward. So next up we have Stephen Wright. You are recognized for 1 minute. Stephen Wright.
Okay, so the first bill that I'd work on is the repeal of Roe versus Wade, because I believe that life begins at conception and it must be protected by Congress. The second bill I'd work on would be to repeal the Jones Act, because it's costing Alaskans $5,000 per person in shipping, fuel, and transportation costs of goods. The last thing that I'd be working on, or my top three, would be a bill to limit the presidential overreach on resource development. We'll have an America First agenda, Defense Production Act to add more federal land for oil and gas exploration, as the United States is the safest and top performing producer of natural gas and oil. And I think that that's vitally important for us to be number one in the world producing oil for our national defense. And then I would prioritize also protecting our border, because walls work, as Trump told us.
Thank you very much, sir. Next up, Mary Peltola. You have the floor for 1 minute. Mary.
Thank you. The first thing I would want to work on is the reauthorization of the Magnuson-Stevens Act. We are clearly in another paradigm. There has been a paradigm shift since the last time it was reauthorized in 2007. I'm also very interested in the protection of salmon habitat. I would like to author a piece of legislation on that, and a piece of legislation on voting rights. I think many of us who are in the special election have some concerns about the challenging nature of our ballots. I think that the budget, although I wouldn't, of course, be the sponsor of that, I think that's the most important policy document that any government puts out. I think that's where we establish our priorities. And that is something that I would be doggedly watching in Alaska's best interests. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Robert Bob Lyons, you are recognized for 1 minute for the first question.
All right, thank you. First, we have a growing homeless and drug proliferation issue. It's right now, there's much suffering being caused. I push for policy changes, how federal funds come in, how they affect the care for the addicts, the mentally ill, how we spend money on housing. I push for different ideas to evolve our systems into the future, into a new century of how we deal with things. The system we have is not working. Next, I would push specifically for a bill due to Alaska's dislocation from the lower 48. We need to have something for the veterans. So if they get sick or stuck down states, they can come up with a way through the VA to get up here, get back home. People are dying alone, away from their families. And it's just not right. We're in a unique situation there. Next, I do everything I could to get start pushing for federal lands to be released, tribal lands that are controlled by the federal government, other lands to be released to the state. Everything we can do to release the state from federal control and DC control, I would start forcefully pushing, working with other members of Congress. We need to get out of our adolescence as a state and move forward.
Thank you, Mr. Lyons. Okay, for question number 2, I am going to turn this over to our ASUAF president, the president of our school, Ashlyn Espinosa. Madam President, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Thomas. All right, so question number 2 asks, Alaska's political culture is academically defined as pragmatic dependent individualism, and that dependence is on the federal government. What 3 projects in Alaska would you like to see federally funded if you were given 3 blank checks? This question is going to go to Mr. Pellegrini first. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, appreciate it. So there's three main aspects and programs I'd like to fortify. The first would be the trades, and make sure that people that are graduating skilled and authorized trades programs and apprenticeship programs will receive college credit regardless. That will go towards some type of articulate degree. that will help enable them find a job even after and return back to Alaska. The second would be healthcare reform, not finding new ways to pay for how we manage these programs, but actually refining them of how we actually manage our healthcare in Alaska. And that goes for both the tribal clinics and institutions, the VA, and the public health, all three. 70% of all the waste and healthcare costs goes to administration. And I feel like with proper reform, we can reduce those costs down to maybe 20 to 30% with the proper oversight. And the third program would be to get the federal government to pay for deep water ports, to pay for the strategic advantage of Alaska with the trans-Arctic routes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The floor next goes to Mr. Thistle.
You know, everyone thinks that a blank check is a solution, but it's really not. If you get a blank check idea in Alaska, what we should be pushing for is how to utilize the natural resources in Alaska the best to create more income in the future. So I would push for us to use that money for research and development for the resources. I'd also like to build a new medical school and VA medical center in the state of Alaska, so that the Alaskans would have their own VA medical school and medical center. And the state of Alaska would have its own full service medical school, which is important. And the third thing I'd probably do is put the money into the Alaska lands and how to utilize those lands publicly for the benefit of the Alaskans. In other words, what we should be doing is trying to make Alaska more habitable for other people to move to, but also preserve the lands and the trusts that are in place currently.
Thank you, Mr. Thistle. Next, we have Joe Woodward, and I see she has put something in the chat. She says, energy reform, health package for all schools, and transportation. Thank you, Ms. Woodward. All right, our next candidate is Mr. Wool. You have the floor.
Oh, thank you very much. I guess if with 3 projects with a blank check, we're sort of working on that right now in Juneau, where to spend some of the federal money that we're getting. I'd like to see a port, maybe an Arctic port in the Nome area. There's a lot of research going on up there. There's a lot of military activity going on up there. There's a lot of science and trade and commerce going on up there. And I think we should have a bigger presence in the Arctic North, Arctic North, where we live. I'd also like to see a pipeline of sorts to move some natural gas, whether it's to the port or to population centers within Alaska. We need some cleaner energy. And I know natural gas isn't the cleanest, but it's cleaner than diesel and coal, which we burn a lot of already. And lastly, I guess Susitna-Wantana Dam, I'm not sure the project is 100% salient right now, but I think some research should be done. And if the government wants to write a big check for it, that would be a good project we've talked about for a long time. So those are my 3 projects.
Thank you, Mr. Wool. All right, next we have Mr. Stephen Wright. You have the floor.
Just had to unmute it here. So 3 things that I would use, because I believe in a maximum benefit for the people of Alaska. So there's a lot of things we could look at. One of the things that is supposed to occur, or at least starting to occur in 2024, is the railway from Alberta to basically Fort McKenzie through the Matanuska Valley there. I'd like to see a rail extension included to Nome as part of this, because the importance of transportation and access to resources, even if those resources are for families, for prices of goods and services, a railway to Nome would be beneficial as well, from Fairbanks to Nome. Second, am I still on? Okay, the second bill to develop would be, I would like to develop is an ANWR bill for oil production. So I'd like to use that money partnered with the federal government, because we have a 50-50 deal with them. And then of course the Port McKenzie Bridge would be my third.
Thank you, Mr. Wright. All right, I'm just gonna hop back in for a second. Ms. Woodward put a little bit more in the chat. So she just expanded on her health package a little bit. She said a health package for schools, meaning introducing a health package that would improve the lives of the student and practice they will incorporate in their lives daily life. All right, next off, we have Mary Peltola. You have the floor.
Thank you, Ashlyn. My number one, the number one thing that I'm concerned about for Alaskans is affordable energy as consumers. I know we pay our bills as Alaskans through the development of natural resources, primarily oil, but as Alaskan consumers, we pay exorbitant prices of probably the highest in the nation. We can't have a real economy without affordable energy. Even in Anchorage, they're paying 33 cents a kilowatt hour, which is very high. And going into next year, I think we recognize that next winter we'll be paying 1.5 to 2 times the home heating costs that we paid this previous winter, which is very scary for most Alaskans. We've got to recommit to essential air services and bypass mail. Essential air services is critical for our logistics, just getting back and forth across Alaska, as well as supply chain issues. And that would also include the marine highway system. Affordable healthcare should be attainable by all people in our nation. Thank you, Ashlyn.
Thank you very much, Mary. All right, we have Mr. Bob Lyons next. You have the floor.
Hi, hello. Under the blank check premise, since the DC's throwing away trillions and trillions, I would spend the money in our rural communities off-road, putting in good water and sewer systems. I've been in places and seen them around the world that are in the same climate, the same kind of area, that have way better water and sewer systems. So I throw a lot of money at that. If we're throwing money everywhere, I'd want to put new access roads and routes to certain areas that want and need them for safety, mobility, for commerce. And that includes the marine highway system, as Mary made an important point. I'd like to work on air and seaports, very important. America's place in the global supply chain. It is one of the most important spots in the world. And we need to make sure our deep water ports and our other ports, airports, everything are working good, working smooth, so we can keep the global chain working, keep the American economy working, and improve our economy in Alaska as well as the American economy. So those would be my 3 points.
Thank you very much. All right, and we have Mr. J.R. Myers. You have the floor.
Thank you. So I've been warning for years about the aggression from the Russian and Chinese governments. So one of my first priorities would be to make sure that we revitalize our defenses in the Bering and Chukchi Seas and in the Arctic Ocean. And doing that through partnership as well with the Alaska Defense Forces, that needs to be reinvigorated. People cannot take their safety for granted, as we see now, watching Ukraine being pummeled into the dirt. So Alaska, there are legislators in Alaska claiming that we still belong to them, So we cannot ignore these kinds of claims or threats, since Alaska is within walking distance, and the Dianides in the winter, you can walk right over to Russia. So that would be my first thing. I would also develop Arctic infrastructure in general, including developing an icebreaker fleet, because we only have one, I think. We need deep water ports, and we need to develop a rail link to the outside through Canada. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Myers. All right, our next question is going to go to Mr. Thistle first, and it asks, what are the 3 biggest issues facing Alaska today? You have 1 minute.
I would say that the 3 biggest issues, one is the economy. Your economy is completely different than the lower 48. It's a lot more expensive to live in Alaska. 33 cents a kilowatt isn't that bad. San Diego is at about 30 cents a kilowatt right now. That's normally what they pay. To charge their electric cars at Target, it's 43 cents a kilowatt. So I'm not really worried about that. But I wouldn't even go with 3. I would say that the number one thing you have to deal with is your economy. Now, if we continue with energy, I've been working, trying to get things through DARPA for a hydroelectric turbine. If we had hydroelectric turbines, let's just talk about this. 20 PSI is equivalent to 504 miles an hour of wind velocity. So if I throw a hydroelectric turbine in your shower, normally people take a shower in the United States at about 60 to 100 PSI. I could, while you're taking a shower, charge a Tesla wall cell for you.
Thank you.
There's your energy. You're welcome.
Thank you. All right. Next up, we have Miss Joe Woodward. Perfect. Let's see in the chat. Sorry, let me find my chat here. She says, energy, housing, and future investments for stabilizing Alaskans. Thank you, Joe.
All economy.
All right. Next up is Mr. Adam Wool. You have the floor for 1 minute.
Oh, thank you. I think Alaska is going through a little boom right now, but we've been a boom and bust state. So I think our economy is really important, and to stabilize it and have some predictability, both at the state level and at the federal level. I think our population decline is concerning. We're losing people. We're not replacing them with enough young people coming here that stay here. And I think things that will attract people are certainly work, but also if you want to attract businesses, you need a trained workforce. So I think we need some workforce development. We need high quality education, both at K-12 and at the university level. And I think we need continued investments in those areas. People will move here if they think there's good schools. Military will locate here if they think there's good schools here as well. So I think we need to work on those kinds of things. I think our healthcare costs are the highest in the nation, and they're not only high, but they're increasing at a high rate. So we have to get a handle on our healthcare costs and figure out how everyone can get it, access to it, and have it affordable. And that's not just an Alaska problem; it's a national problem as well. Definitely in Alaska.
Thank you. Next, we have Mr. Stephen Wright. You have the floor.
Okay, so as far as the biggest issues facing Alaska, I believe that we have a lot of federal and state overreach, decimating our economy, from PFD grabs to limits on our ability to develop our resources. And this is from the federal government on down. So a lot of top-down stuff needs to go away. We must legislate against this overreach, limits on our ability to develop our natural resources, land management, the control of our and access of through our infrastructure to those resources, restricting our access to land development. We also have mismanagement of lands leading to large fires and other mismanagement concerns. For a stable environment, Alaskans have a shared ownership and management in the Alaska land resources. It should not be managed by the federal government. We should be able to take control of some of these federal lands that they haven't still given us from. So that's an important factor.
Thank you. All right, Miss Mary Peltola, same question to you. You have 1 minute.
I think the overarching concern for Alaska at this point with the untimely departure of the death of Don Young is the need to stabilize our presence in DC and make sure that our delegation is fully represented. I do think that part of stabilizing Alaska requires a hard look at this 9% inflation rate that we're seeing nationally. This is the highest inflation rate we've had in 50 years, and that there will be cascading effects, especially to middle and lower income Alaskans, because that cost will be borne out by consumers ultimately. I think we need to train Alaskans for Alaskan jobs. We've got, as I believe all Alaskans can see with their own eyes in real time, the effects of global climate change and the need for precautionary management of all of our resources, especially salmon and the myriad species that are in decline under this new paradigm. That time, thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, we have Mr. Bob Lyons next. You have the floor.
Hi, hello. 1 and 2, I would consider just as dangerous. Drug proliferation, it's bubbling in the underground, it's our foundations rotting with it. And we can't hold up a building without a foundation. People are dying everywhere, and it's at the root of our society, and it's really important that we look at it. It needs its due attention. But the possible where we sit in the possible outbreak of war with Russia and other Eastern Bloc states, or vulnerabilities and standing. And I'd say our economy, the devastation of the last 2 years, the small business decline, the decline in jobs in general, many people who are not returning back to work after their jobs were devastated over their own circumstances over the last couple of years with COVID and everything that's happened. So yeah, the economy, foreign policy, Russia, the war with Russia, and drugs. Get our people off drugs. They're killing people. which has to do with the border.
Thank you, Mr. Lyons. And we have Mr. Myers next. You have the floor.
Okay. The three biggest issues facing Alaska, I would say demographics are definitely one of them. The loss of population because of opportunities, loss of opportunities, and that needs to be addressed by education and job creation. And we need to look at self-sufficiency in food and in value-added products in agriculture, energy diversification, ecotourism. There are many different ways to build the economy through alternative energy, for instance, like the thermal, tidal, wind, solar. I mean, Alaska has it all, even maybe miniatures. Nuclear plants might be feasible in some areas. We have to keep an open mind in these days, you know, things are changing so rapidly, so we can't shut anything down. I think another problem is our isolation and the drug abuse, the substance abuse, the domestic violence, all of that happens because of the severe cycles. Anyhow, thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Silvio Pellegrini, you have the floor.
Outstanding. Thank you, ma'am. I feel like some of the main issues involve the economy, healthcare, and education, and they're all intertwined. And I think they all be addressed because on the economy, we have to make sure that we decrease issues that we have in our supply chain, that goods are getting here shorter, faster, without being spoiled, they can get here fresh. When it comes down to healthcare, we have programs to make sure that we get the right talent, the right people up here, and also train them so they are the best medical staff, and then train Alaskans to become medical staff and find ways of funding those programs through the VA, Department of Education, and other grants of this sort. And then lastly, would be specific ways to clean our air. And that ties into changing our energy sources. As everyone mentioned, is that there's nothing wrong with going to nuclear power and finding other resources and locations to install nuclear plants that also support our military installations, ensure national defense, and our local economies where everybody can win.
Thank you very much. All right, I'm going to hand the floor off to Cole Lazowski to ask the next question. Cole, you have the floor.
Thank you. This question is going to be a two-parter. So what, if any, do you believe to be the biggest impacts of climate change to Alaska and its people is the first part. And the second part is, what role do you believe this governmental position should play in addressing these impacts? I'm going to go to Ms. Woodward first. So you can type your response into the chat and I'll read it. I'll come back to you. I'm going to go to Mr. Wool. You have 1 minute.
Thank you. Yes, first question, if any, yes, there is definitely climate impacts in Alaska. First thing we might notice is the fish populations on the Yukon-Kuskokwim, and there's possible many causes, but I do believe climate is definitely part of it. The heating of the ocean is affecting salmon for sure. And I think we need to address that. Also, certain schools of fish are migrating north due to the temperatures, and they don't even know where to look for them sometimes. So fish is one impact already. Infrastructure, our infrastructure will be heavily impacted, roads, bridges, buildings. As the permafrost melts and the ground shifts, we're already noticing it when we drive on roads. That's going to be a very expensive impact. And of course, coastal erosion, we've heard about that as well, moving communities away from the coast as the land is eroding under it. These are big impacts. We have to deal with it. Is there an answer? Yes, I think there is. And legislation can help. Awareness can help. Public education can help. But we have to implement policies dealing with carbon. We have to incentivize people to find cleaner energy.
Cole, you're muted.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Wool. I'm going to read Ms. Woodward's chat really quick. Pollution and more citizen participation in keeping Alaska clean, lands, water, and air for Alaskans and wildlife. So now I'm going to go to Mr. Wright. You have the floor.
Okay, so I think one of the bigger impacts is going to be the Bering Strait area as far as our strategic position in the world. We need to have icebreakers like we have, like Russia has. And we need to be able to, because this channel is going to be huge for shipping as we go forward into the future. The impact is going to be important because you have communist countries like Russia and China claiming the Arctic regions to control trade routes through the Arctic. We should responsibly develop the Tongass and other natural resources to protect against excessive amounts of carbon being burned through forest fires from overgrown timbers and mismanaged federal resources. Additionally, putting icebreakers in Nome and reopening places like ADAC would be critical to developing our, restoring our Navy in Alaska.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Ms. Peltola. Thank you.
Thank you, Cole. For the biggest impact of climate change in Alaska, there are myriad impacts. I mentioned earlier the Bering Sea situation. I feel like we are all witnessing an ecosystem collapse in terms of marine derived nutrients that need to make it up to all of the headwaters of all of our river systems. I have noticed 5 consecutive years of lack of appropriate snow cover, which has a lot of effects on everything from ptarmigan to salmon to caribou. There isn't anything that is unaffected by having winter after winter of lack of snow cover. That is a very bad situation. The role that this position plays is critical in things like reauthorization of Magnuson-Stevens Act to take into consideration global climate change and the effects that that will have on the marine system and on down the line, as well as marine debris. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Lyons, you have the floor.
Yes, what's the question? Oh.
I can repeat it if you want.
Climate change, yeah, effects of climate change. Yeah, go ahead and repeat it, please.
Okay. What, if any, do you believe to be the biggest impacts of climate change to Alaska and its people is the first part. And then the second part is, what role do you believe this governmental position should play in addressing these impacts?
So we have the biggest impact to the people of Alaska, I'd have to say, is our abilities to fill our bellies. We have subsistence, we have hunters, we have fishermen, we have the global warming aspect of here is ruining the ice packs. It's changing the way, as Mary said, the way the whole ecosystems are working. And it's obvious right out your window in your face. But I'm a common sense kind of guy, and I don't believe you flip a light switch. I believe that causes instability like we're seeing now, and it causes eventual war and death to people because people are going to fight over power. So what I think you do is intertwine it, and you pump as much oil as you can pump right now so we build the future and pay for the future and the innovation for the children. You may put some regulations, some tax holds on it, but you actually give the ones that are trying to do something to build renewables and to do things for the future to actually fix things. You give them the ability by creating a space of affluence where people can use innovation and creativity. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Pump oil.
Thank you. Mr. Myers?
Excuse me. Yes, thank you. I do believe that we're seeing more severe and unpredictable weather extremes, including coastal erosion and fish stock collapses. So we have to take that seriously, and we can't say it's something that's going to be happening down the road in generations to come. But we really must look to the 7th generation concept. What's really happening now, and how is it going to affect 7 generations from us? I think the government does have a role, but it's more in community planning and development. Don't allow development in the areas that are going to be subject to these kind of devastations. That's number one. And then also, rather than government regulation, why doesn't government, since government has such a big footstep in Alaska in the federal, state, and local levels, government should set the standard. Government should be held accountable for how it expends energy and how it develops the energy resources, because they are the major players, local, state, and federal government.
Thank you. Mr. Pellegrini?
Thank you very much. So climate change is real, and I feel that the biggest impact to Alaskans is our pocketbook, right? Supply chain is extremely important, and the cost of fuel is absolutely universally affects everybody in every aspect of their life. So finding ways to find alternate routes of getting goods and services up to Alaska, finding ways of producing natively, finding alternative energy sources such as geothermal wind and nuclear to allow farms, indoor farms, et cetera, to make it more of a safe haven for agriculture all year round are ways that Alaskans and the federal government can find ways of providing grants and other ways and tax relief to the state itself and through special programs through the Department of Agriculture to get these businesses growing, booming, and money back into the state to address both climate change and the economy.
Thank you. Mr. Thistle?
Thank you for the question. You know, we're gonna have to get reality here, folks. And reality is, I'm not gonna give you an environmental science degree or a space studies degree from Harvard University in 3 seconds. Okay, we get 33,000 miles closer to the sun every 100 years. I cover that in my video on thistle.world. Okay, I'm going to have 6 months in Congress if I'm elected in June. We're not going to have to worry a damn thing about environmental sciences or 7 generations down the road if we can't step inside right now in Washington, D.C. and address this Ukraine issue. The Bidens have been doing illegal activities over in the Ukraine since 2016. We'll just check Hunter's notebook. Okay? If we don't get a hold of what's going on in the world globally right now, we're not going to have to worry about climate change. And neither is Alaska. Russia will walk right in. Population is smaller than Boston and the city I grew up in. It's over with if Russia walks into you.
Thank you. I'm going to pass it on to Espinosa for question number 5.
Thank you very much, Cole. All right. Question number 5 asks, do you support the federal government opening up the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, ANWR, for oil and gas exploration, drilling, and lease sales? This question is going to go to Mr. Adam Wool first. Wool, you have the floor.
No, thanks. Thanks for giving me the easy question. I love this one. ANWR is a very controversial issue, but I know our congressional delegation has been pushing for it for many, many years. And it finally got into a tax bill that our Senator Lisa Murkowski voted for. So that's, and leases were sold last year, and pretty much the state of Alaska bought all of them through ADA, and an Australian company bought a couple more. So, you know, the 1002 area is a portion of ANWR, not the whole thing. I think in some ways what's done is done. And if those leases become valuable, great. I'm a little skeptical. I don't really think it's the be all end all that everyone thinks it's going to be. I think oil exploration is important for Alaska, and I support it, but I don't think we should, you know, double or triple down. And, you know, we should invest everything that we have into oil exploration. And it's good for our state coffers. On federal land, it's certainly good for the federal coffers and NPRA and such. But I think we also have to look into other things and be supportive of other technologies besides burning hydrocarbons.
Thank you, Mr. Wool. Mr. Wright, you have the floor.
Yes, I support unequivocally the opening and development of ANWR, as it is vital to our national defense, and it provides protections to the world for safely developed oil and refined fuel. We, like here in Alaska, we do the development of oil and other minerals better than any other place in the world. Developing ANWR protects us against foreign enemies who wish to destroy our way of life. Just opening up ANWR would provide easily the amount of oil that we buy from Russia. We've been buying from Russia. It's kept our oil prices down. So that's something that I definitely support 100%, and we need to get on board and get this oil flowing and drill, baby, drill.
Thank you, Mr. Wright. Next up, we have Miss Mary Peltola. You have the floor.
In my 10 years in Juneau, I supported ANWR every time it came up to vote. I've lobbied on behalf of opening ANWR to other congressmen in the past. I do support resource development. I think that it's also important, you know, for every region of the state, they've got a resource development project on the horizon. I think social license to operate is really critical. I don't think those decisions should necessarily be made by people in Anchorage or Juneau or DC. I think that the people who live in the regions where the development is taking place must be on board with the level of risk that is inherent in whatever that natural resource project is. And I believe that the folks on the North Slope Borough are quite comfortable with the development of ANWR. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, next up, we have Mr. Lyons.
Yes, hello. Definitely. We need to move forward as a society. And as you know, the global instability we have right now going on is due to energy. So I say we need to be energy secure. We need also to pay for tomorrow. This is about the next generation. If you want a world with efficient working renewables and everything operating correctly, you got to get there. And to get there, you don't flip the light off and wander around in the dark, you know. And also, you pay for it. You pump the oil. You create the environment so you can have the innovation. That's all. And then, you know, I think our pipeline right now is what, 1/3 full. So we could triple it. We could triple it, definitely. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. All right. Mr. Myers, you have the floor.
Thank you. Again, I think we're called to be good stewards of all of our planet, of all of our resources. I prefer that we move into alternative energy sources, but I understand the pressing need, the national security needs at hand, and the international security needs really with our partners in other places that are being blackmailed through energy, like natural gas and oil. So yes, you know, let's allow the local communities to have input on the development, but we do have a national security issue at hand. And I just wanted to interject on the side that the oil does belong to the people, and the people of Alaska should receive a full PFD without equivocation by the so-called leaders, which are really their servants sent to Juneau. So people in Juneau sitting in the legislature, hear me, hear the people of Alaska, they need their PFDs. It's a matter of economic security. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, next up we have Mr. Silvio Pellegrini. You have the floor.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And absolutely, I support the discovery and gathering of resources in ANWR. The big issue, though, is how are we going to go about it? And I think it's extremely important for a couple reasons. But the biggest part is that I really don't feel Alaskans want DC to regulate how Alaskans do business. I think that's a really important sticking point. And what does that mean? That means we need to involve the communities, the sovereign native tribal groups, the worker groups, even industry, the oil companies, that figure out how can we do this better, cleaner, because there's only about a couple of years of resources left up there before it has to move on, and we have to be very strategic of how we discover these resources. But it also means of what are we going to springboard into next? What are we going to do to, after the next stage of discovery? Because we have to keep and figure out how we're going to diversify, our fuel sources, because in the long run, it's going to be non-sustainable.
Thank you very much. All right, Mr. Thistle, you have the floor.
I support the ANWR because I like I said earlier, I said resource development is crucial to the economy. We really need to look at the resources of Alaska and utilize them properly to build the economy for Alaskans. And I do believe that the PFDs need to be addressed as well. But we have to face it, folks. Oil is an archaic energy source. And we need to move on. Even nuclear power is archaic now. We need to move on, and we need to look at things that DARPA has been working on for a couple years now, and we need to start implementing more of our resources from DARPA, more of the new types of energy we've been developing at DARPA. The people need that now. We don't need to wait another 20 to 30 years for those kinds of experimental resources. And those resources are safe. They're just as safe as solar or electric. So we need to look at them.
Thank you, Mr. Thistle. All right. And our last comment on this question is from Ms. Woodward. She says, no, I do not. On the grounds of Indigenous people and the wildlife, there are more energy investments that can be introduced than that won't disrupt the life on the North Slope. I am not in favor of oil drilling in ANWR. Nuclear power plants require uranium, and there is only enough uranium in the world to supply the nuclear power plants already built for no more than 100 years. The federal government offers federal funds. Alaska is a wildlife state. Thank you, Ms. Woodward. All right, I'm going to pass this back off to Kolozowski for the next question.
Thank you. This one is just a one-parter. What in your professional background would make you an effective member of Congress is the question. And I'm going to start with Mr. Wright.
Okay, let's see. I've worked on aircraft for 22 years. I've been a school teacher. I've worked on contracts and contracting as a contract officer rep for 3 years. I've a degree in accounting. I've worked on budgets and resource. I was a resource advisor for the C-17 Globemaster and E-3 AWACS on Elmendorf Air Force Base. I've been involved in tourism for 4 years. I lived in rural Alaska in Hyder for a year. I've run for Congress before, visiting many communities and learning from many Alaskans. I have an America First agenda, and I have been educated in military science with degrees in management and accounting, as well as many upper level classes in education and training from elementary to secondary education. As I said, I served as an enlisted airman for 22 years, a little over 22 years, and I know what it takes to get the job done. So vote for Stephen Wright, your next congressman for all of Alaska.
Thank you. I'm going to move on to Ms. Peltola. Thank you.
Thank you, Cole. One of the things that I think that has trained me well for this job is being in the state legislature for 10 years. I represented Bethel and Western Alaska for 10 years in the state house. Like I mentioned in my opening comments, I helped rebuild the Bush Caucus, which was a bipartisan coalition of 10 rural legislators. I have worked as a communications manager for a large industrial development project to other Alaskans and specifically people who live closest to that project. I've been a salmon advocate working and coalescing 118 tribes to speak to the right people who make decisions, the right folks at the top. One of the things I pride myself is working well with others. I believe in partnering, and one of my biggest lessons in Juneau was the need to have 59 best friends and work across party lines and make sure that relationships are strong. And I will leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you. Next person I'm going to go to is Mr. Lyons.
Yeah, hello. I've managed work crews. I've managed offices. I was a commissioner here in my hometown, Houston Valley here. Worked with people from all different kinds of backgrounds. I was raised all across this nation, an Army brat. Been around all kinds of different cultures. People that don't think like me or might not believe things like me. I know how to go and not look at the things that make us different, but find the things that we can do together so we can move things forward and get things done. I built my own home, 2 of them now from the ground up. Us Alaskans have a great gift that we know how to talk across the line. We know how to agree and get something done, get somewhere. So also, I worked on the front lines in this battle, the addicts, the mentally ill, on the front lines of COVID. I have heart and drive. I want to help these people. I want to get Alaska the help we need. I want to represent all Alaskans. I want to represent hard work. I want to give transparency, dedication, determination. I got a term limit, about a 2-term limit. I don't want to go to DC to be in their club. I want to go there to get a job done, to try to change the trend, try to get things going back in the right direction. Try to get things for the next generation, try to get things for my kids and their kids after them.
Thank you.
Stop the generational malaise and generational strife that's going on out in the streets. Thank you very
Mr.
much.
Myers.
Yes. Well, as a behavioral health clinician, a counselor, I've worked with many different people across Alaska in rural and urban settings, and you learn to be a good listener and you listen to people's stories, what makes them who they are, where are they going, what are their aspirations, what brings them hope, what lifts them out of despair, right? So I think also that's part of the assessment process, observation and listening. You have to have a good assessment so you can make a good diagnosis, so you can form a treatment plan that's real and responsive, and that's going to be a collaborative effort with the patient and the provider. So again, communication, collaborative teamwork, we each have a role to play, we each have a part in the process. I think that would make me a very good advocate. And so I can be bold and confrontational when need be. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Mr. Pellegrini. Thank you.
Thank you for the floor. I think the biggest thing about my background is really what I'm not, and that's a politician. I'm a leader. I've spent the last 20 years of my life leading people in multiple capacities, both in my civilian career as a project manager in the IT and cybersecurity world, and also in the intelligence world. But I think the important part, though, is what leaders have to do. It's not necessarily be an expert in any single thing, but be able to listen, as Mr. Myers has said. Listen to people, listen to your experts, because that's really the job as representative, is that your opinion doesn't matter. It's the people's opinion. And I feel like we've gained a lot of distance between that, of what Congress has echoed, and also what the Alaskan people have wanted to be heard. And I think that's the important part, is as a leader, I will make people heard.
Thank you. Mr. Thistle?
Thank you, Cole. First of all, I'd like to thank the university for doing this forum. Secondly, I'm a military veteran. I was a Texas Military Forces officer down on the border, so I'm familiar with the border. I walked out of a wheelchair 5 times after injuries from the military and the police departments that they said I'd never walk again. I'm a police officer, so I know when the other congressmen or the politicians are full of whatever, you know, and they're not making sense. I took space studies at Harvard University. I've studied psychophysics, so I know how to take a survey of people and know what the public wants instead of what I want. It's more important what the public wants in Alaska, not what I want. However, they should be informed of what's going on in Washington, because all the other states affect Alaska. And lastly, I was a janitor, so I know how to take the trash out. I think that's the most important thing you have to remember. At the end of the day, you have to take out the trash.
Thank you. I'm going to move on to Ms. Woodward, who I believe has typed into the chats. One second, sorry. The numerous local organizations and community participation, input in local, state, and federal governments, input and participation, and the credited and non-credited academic courses during my lifetime and my past employments. I'm going to move on to Mr. Wool.
Thank you. I guess my most pressing experience is the one I have right now, being a state representative. I think that really helps to be a U.S. representative. I've learned a lot down here in Juneau in 8 years. Been on committees, chaired committees, moved bills, passed bills, and that kind of experience is important going to Washington. I understand there's a lot of disdain for politicians. It's easy to throw them all under the bus, but look, if you're all here wanting the job, I don't think you can criticize everyone that's in the job, because this is the job that you want to be in. I think it's important to have that experience on how to get along, how to build bridges, how to compromise, how to get along with your colleagues and move things forward. And it's not always easy. Before this job, I was in the private business world for about 30 years. I owned many different businesses, retail businesses. I dealt with employees. I dealt with customers. I dealt with working people all the time. I got a good feel of personal relationships, and I carried that here to Juneau, and I can carry that to Washington.
Thank you. I'm going to give it to Espinosa to ask another question.
Thank you, Cole. All right. Our next question asks, what is your vision for the future of Alaska? Describe this state in 20 years from today, politically, culturally, and economically. This is going to go to Ms. Peltola first. You have the floor.
Thank you, Ms. Espinosa. Alaska, we're a young state. We still have a lot of infrastructure needs in Alaska. I believe in high quality, affordable housing, affordable energy, access to good education. Critically, we really need broadband internet access, reliable broadband internet access across the state to keep up with the rest of the nation and the world. It's increasingly the way that we communicate and get information. We all have to have access to the resources that Alaskans are accustomed to having access to, such as wildlife, fish and game, and birds. We need to continue, like I said earlier, to champion our major infrastructure needs and get the support that Alaska needs from the federal government to build up these things that the lower 48 folks take for granted. We need inclusivity and to make sure that all of our 6 regions in the state are working together, more stability. I think it's also very important that as Alaskans, we practice civility and respectfulness. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pasola. Next, I'm going to hand the floor over to Mr. Lyons.
Thank you. I see Alaskans united and untied from Washington, D.C. control of all our decisions in 20 years. We need to rise from our adolescence, and right now is the time for that, for the next generation. So we need to take the reins. We need to take control of our destinies. We need to be self-determinative in our resource decisions and growth and land use. We need to make our own decisions. We live here and we know what we can do and cannot do with our great land. Outside forces do not have that interest in the mind the way we do, and we deserve as people to live free of those forces. Alaska will be united and untied and lifted from the cycle of poverty and the cycle of addiction we're facing currently. And we're going to do it our way because we're Alaskans and because we know how to do it. Thank you. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lyons. All right, next up we have we have Mr. J.R. Myers next.
Thank you again. So my vision for Alaska would be in 2042, in 20 years. Wow, 2042. So I think Alaska needs to be more integrated into the, continent through infrastructure development, like I mentioned earlier, through a railroad link through Canada. I think that would be a very important way to get goods and people moving back and forth in a more consistent manner. But beyond that, I think Alaska needs to be a leader in innovation in the Arctic, as we all were mentioning before as well. Alaska can be an innovator because of the frontier spirit and the need to improvise. It's natural, and the legacy of the native people who had ingenious methods of, living in the land. We can incorporate all these things in moving into the future. We, pioneering our future, honoring our legacy. That's another thing I like. So that's what I would like to see.
Thank you. Mr. Silvio Pellegrini, you have the floor next.
Thank you. And thank you again, Mr. Myers. I definitely agree with a lot of your sentiment, most particularly on the cultural side. Alaskans always been known as being the grit, the makeshift, and doing what little to make the most of what we got, right? And so innovation is definitely at the forefront. I think in the coming years between federal programs and academics is that they're going to be at the forefront of a lot of resources and resource development to come out with cleaner and better energy for states and state programs. Next, politically, I feel like Alaska is definitely a purple state, and it's like that by intention, is that people can both agree. You have liberals agreeing that we need oil, and you have conservatives agreeing that we need to conserve our resources and the environment. So I think that will continue to grow, and I think these groups will definitely find more footing, if not a voice and presence in Congress. And then lastly is economically. And I think this is why the deep sea ports and the Trans-Arctic region is very important from both existential threats from potential adversaries and making sure we have freedom of movement for our supply and trade routes to our European partners, but also to gain supplies from the lower 48 up to Alaska to make sure that we can make a buck cheaper.
Thank you. Next up, we have Mr. David Thistle. You have the floor.
I believe my vision for the future of Alaska is for it not to have to take 30% of its operating budget from the federal government. Therefore, it can rule itself a little bit better. I also like to see the development of natural resources, the responsible development of natural resources, and the innovation using the ARPA-H program to build a new state medical school and a new VA hospital up there and a couple of new medical facilities. ARPA-H is the new research and development branch of the government. It's modeled under DARPA, and I believe Alaska is a very good place for us to use those monies as a federal government responsibly and enhance the ability for Alaskans to have actually affordable medical treatment. So that's what I'd like to see as a vision for the future of Alaska.
Thank you very much. All right, next we have comments from Ms. Woodward, and she typed in the chat, I cannot predict the future, but if the correct investments and projects are introduced, the cultural will experience less climate change and politically no difference, as the people will elect the people. Innovation can be interstate solutions versus merely community problem solving. Without the people exercising more toward climate change and green energy, the future will be experiencing hotter temps by at least 20 degrees and higher temperatures each year. Thank you, Ms. Woodward. I will hand the floor over to Mr. Adam Wool.
Thank you. I'll try to squeeze it all into 60 seconds. It's a big question. Politically, I think it's probably going to get a little more moderate here in Alaska. It's pretty polarized right now. I'd say less polarization would be great. Ranked choice voting hopefully will help with that as far as elected representatives, and hopefully that will cause the representatives to respond to the people that vote for him, the moderate people that vote for him. Culturally, I think we have a diverse culture, but I think it needs to be more diverse, to be honest with you. I think we need to bring in more people. People need to move up here. In the late 70s and 70s and 80s, when people came up to work on the pipeline, they moved up here from all over the state, all over the country. I mean, I don't think that's going to happen right now. We have a lot of work projects going on, but we need to grow our own labor. People aren't going to come up here for that. So our development going future is educating our young people to get them to stay in Alaska and work in Alaska and raise families in Alaska. I think if we can do that, that'll be great. We might bring up some other people from outside that may want to live in Alaska, yet telecommute somewhere else in lower 48 where it's more crowded and more expensive. So those are just the beginnings of the answer to that question.
Thank you. All right. And our final candidate for this question, we have Mr. Wright. You have the floor.
Okay, I see in Alaska in 20 years as a conservative state with the richest state in the union with the best practices in resource development. I see in Alaska that is stable with rails connecting from Nome to Fairbanks to Alberta to Anchorage. I see Port McKenzie as Alaska's most productive deep water port. I see farmland being developed in Nenana, and I see many responsible mines like Pebble Mine being completed and developed responsibly. Infrastructure to resources is the key to tomorrow's mines. I see development corridors established throughout all Alaska. I see large PFDs for people, future PFDs for resources. As long as the Alaska Constitution is balanced through the Constitutional Convention in 2022, roads connecting Ketchikan, Juneau through the Cass oil production increased by opening Anwar. I see logging industry, the logging industry is booming, and the rest I'll put into my my summary. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Wright. All right, I'm going to turn the floor back over to Kolozowski to ask the last question.
Yeah, as Senator, actually President Espinosa just mentioned, yeah, this is the last question before final comments. It's a two-parter. The first one is, do you support increased University of Alaska funding? And the second part is, going to college is expensive. Do you support the forgiveness of student debts? And we're going to start off with Mr. Lyons.
I support, hello. For the second part of the question, I support a broadening of a public service type student loan forgiveness, where you work for it, where depending on what kind of career you choose and pick, there may be a staggered rate. You know, I mean, if you're taking loans, you need to pay for the loans and be aware of the loans you're taking. There needs to be a responsibility taken upon the universities that give these loans out, and the banks that they work with as well. But yes, I think, you know, myself, I got into public service, and if I do 10 years, they're going to help me pay off my loans. So there's no reason that there shouldn't be, if you're a fireman or whatever other kind of job that you got doctor or something, that there can't be some kind of rated thing depending upon it. But what was the first part again?
The first part was, do you support increased University of Alaska funding?
It depends on what you're going to spend it on. Everything comes down to what the need is, and if the need is actually going to be beneficial to the student, because the university is there for the student. And I don't want a new coffee room for any teacher. They've got too much already.
Okay. Moving on to Mr. Myers.
Yes. I would support increased educational funding if it was targeted towards technological, innovation, that sort of thing. Again, like we were talking about, becoming innovators. I think that starts with education. We have to have an educated populace, not only for economic development, but for civic participation and meaningful democracy to take place as well. Just throwing that in. I do believe in the forgiveness of student debt. I think that's the beginning of the universal debt jubilee. And we cannot burden people with these predatory lending practices and expect society to go okay. People are putting aside their lives. They're not buying homes. They're foregoing having families because of these student debt burdens. Sure, there are programs which I myself am a participant in, like the National Health Service or Student Loan Repayment Program, which are great, but we need to expand it even further.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to move on to Mr. Pellegrini.
Thank you for the question. So first off, I'd like to say I am completely on board with Bob's opinion, and so Mr. Myers. I think it's very important, well, mostly Mr. Myers. I think it's extremely important that there's work programs or ways for these students to be placed in programs to pay off that debt in some way, but I do not believe in any type of absolution of creating an empty debt market. I don't think that's really productive, and nor does it encourage responsible spending or academics. The second part of that, though, is encouragement through work programs and the trades. But I also think that deferment or rechanging or modifying legislation to allow these students that perhaps one day they can't pay off their loans, that it can be declared in bankruptcy. And as for funding for the university, absolutely. There are many programs regarding the studies of geological studies over there and the counterproliferation of nuclear weapons, the detection of those systems that are definitely out there on the federal biz ops and the academic, and because it's a UARC, right? University Affiliated Research Center. So there's already plenty of federal money that can be pushed their way through national defense and intelligence research.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
I'm going to move on to Mr. Thistle.
I think I've already answered the first part of the question when I said we should develop a new state medical school. I think one of the most important things for Alaskans is healthcare. So I think a new state medical school, a full service VA hospital, I think those are the first two steps that should be taken at the university for funding. I also believe that the students should be given the equipment they need to study. So you should have your computer labs and all of your things of that nature upgraded, so that if there is another COVID outbreak, you all have laptops or desktops to take home with you to do your schooling. That's very, very important to stay on the books and stay studying when something like COVID happens, which could have been prevented. If you watch my video on YouTube, Thistle 2020 Walls or Windmills, you can see how fiscally responsible I can be and what I can predict in the future and what can come. So the second part is I don't agree with the forgiveness of student debt. There are too many programs like Teach America. There's a GI Bill, go to the National Guard. That's my request.
I'm going to have to cut you off, but yes. I'm going to move on to Ms. Woodward. I believe she commented in the chat, so I will see. I do not support waiving the loans, but I promote a reasonable payback system. As far as higher funding, not at this time, as UAF has built the engineering school, and UAF should do all that they can along with the public in filling the school with students. Engineering is the field of the future, NASA, DOT, etc. After Ms. Woodward, Mr. Wool, you have the floor.
Thank you. I support funding the university. I always have. I chaired the finance subcommittee for the university and was able to get them extra funding many years in a row, even when they signed a pact with the governor saying we would take a $20 million cut. We pushed back on that and succeeded. So I totally support the university. It's good for Alaska. It's good for Fairbanks, and it's good for the future. As far as the student loans, when I was a student at UAF, there was a program that if you paid your loan off for so many years, after 5 years, it got the rest of it got removed. So basically the state covered half of it, which I was certainly pleased to be part of and fortunate. I'd like to see something like that maybe on the national level. I'm not sure just eradicating all debt right away is the right way to go. Also, what about the person that just finished paying their debt last year and suddenly everyone else gets theirs eradicated? So I think some sort of progressive program should be put in place. And I think it is a problem nationally. I think the average student has about $35,000 debt. And university system, fortunately, is affordable. And I think it's that way.
Thank you, Mr. Wolf. Mr. Wright?
Yeah, I'll preface this. I got my degrees going to school part-time while I was full-time active duty military. I also received a lot of grants and used tuition assistance and other things. There are avenues out there for those that want to get an education, even if they have to go to school part-time. So it took me 8 years to get a master's degree. I got two bachelors and a master's. So there are opportunities out there. As far as funding the University of Alaska Anchorage, I think they have to show forth the means to be able to develop they're a land grant institution, therefore they can develop resources and develop a lot of different avenues and opportunities, lease land. There's a lot of things they can do to acquire more funding. I don't think the state needs to pay an over amount, whereas I think that our institutions they are.
Thank you, Mr. Wright. Going on to Ms. Peltola.
Thank you. I support anything that improves a person's quality of life and collectively our overall quality of life. And there is nothing that is more beneficial to a person's quality of life over the decades than a quality education. And that includes K through 12 as well as university. I was also a beneficiary of grants and state of Alaska post-secondary student loans. I am concerned about the predatory lending that is going on, and I do support some kind of structured student loan forgiveness that takes into consideration things like past debt that has been paid off, and in a way that it's fair to the greatest number of people. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to give it on to Senator Thomas so that we can finish up and get concluding remarks.
Perfect. Thank you, Senate Chair Kolozowski. I appreciate you participating in this for the entire 3 candidate forums. Also, thank you to our new president, Ashlyn Espinosa. Madam President, thank you for also moderating the debates. What we're going to do is the same thing that we did with the opening statements. We're going to do with the closing statements. So it's going to be 90 seconds, a minute and a half, but we're going to start from the bottom and move up. So Mary Peltola, you are going to start, and then we're going to go Stephen Wright, Adam Wool, Joe Woodward. Miss Woodward, if you want to start typing, I'll be able to read yours. And then we'll go Thistle, Pellegrini, Myers, and Lyons. So Mary Peltola, you have the floor for a minute and a half for your closing statements. You are recognized.
This special congressional election is a remarkable chance to send to Washington a champion who understands Alaska's ways of life and has the vision and integrity to take on our greatest challenges. This is an opportunity we can't afford to miss. The Yupik word "Ikayukusuda" means working together. I'm working with a diverse group of Alaskans and a strong professional team to build my historic campaign in this race. We need a representative in Congress who can excite and unite our diverse population. This week, my campaign released the names of 100 Alaskans, leaders in politics, business, and communities who have endorsed my campaign. These Alaskans recognize that I have the perspective, experience, and vision to best fight for Alaska in Washington. Following in the steps of Representative Don Young, we can build upon the successes of Alaska's past and take a decisive step into the 21st century. We can create an Alaska that is inclusive and prosperous. Please join my campaign today and help me succeed in this special primary and win the special election this summer. My website is marypeltola.com, and I'm asking for your support and your vote. Thank you for being here today, and thank you so much for this important forum. Buyana.
Thank you, Mary. Up next, we have Stephen Wright. Stephen Wright, you are recognized for 1.5 minutes, good sir. Stephen, you are recognized.
Okay, so
Stephen, you're on mute. You want me to come back to you? All right, I'll give you like 10 more seconds. Stephen going once. Stephen going twice. I'm going to pass and come back to you. I'm putting a big circle around your name. Adam Wool, you are recognized for 1.5 minutes. You have the floor, Mr. Wool.
Thank you very much, and thank you for hosting this event. Again, I've been in Fairbanks 40 years, a business owner for about 30. As Nat Hers, who was also on this call, good to see you, Nat. I'm a bar owner, so I owned a music venue for 20 years. I dealt with a lot of different kinds of people and a lot of different situations, and I gained a lot of experience from that. I told you earlier I won in Fairbanks in a district that voted for Donald Trump. I'm a Democrat, and I wanted a Donald Trump district. I just want to get that point across. I reached across party lines. I have bipartisan support every election. Joe Biden recently won. I got more votes than him. So I think I've proven that I can win in a politically challenging district and have continued to do so. I represent regular people, if you want to say that. I don't have big corporate backers. I didn't work for a big lobbying firm, mineral extraction or anything like that. I'm just a legislator now who sold my business, and I'm ready to move on. Being a legislator has given me a lot of good experience, and I'm ready to take that experience down to Washington, D.C. I work in a caucus right now that has a very slim majority. We have a 21-person caucus out of 40, which means we have to work very closely together and coordinate and collaborate with others on the other side to get things done, much like Congress. I have kids in public schools. I have 2 young kids. One's in high school, one's in elementary school still. I support public education in a big way, and I think we need all the help we can get in Alaska. And if that means from the federal government, that's great. But we definitely need support for our next generation. We need to grow our next generation. We need them to stay in Alaska and help Alaska grow. We have a lot of concerns, especially energy, and I look forward to that discussion. And I don't necessarily think that communities on the North Slope should be the only ones deciding the future of energy, because oil industry will choose more oil, and I'm not sure that's always the best thing.
Thank you, Mr. Wool. Okay, so Joe Woodward, I'm going to read what she put in the chat, and then Stephen Wright, if you can't fix your audio issues, I will read it at the end. But let me go to Joe Woodward here. She says, Mr. Thomas, Miss Espinoza, and Mr. Ozowski, thank you and the ASUAF for this opportunity to be introduced to Alaskans. It is an honorable opportunity. Thank you again, Joe Woodward. And then she finishes up with, if elected, I will pay my round trip airfare for this short term and this unexpected vacancy in the House, and I will not accept any wages for the short term service. It will be an honor to serve Alaskans. It is not about the money anymore. It is about what needs to be done and how we can help. So thank you, Ms. Woodward. Next up on the list, going up the list, is David Thistle. David, you are recognized for 1 minute, 30 seconds. You have the floor, sir.
First, I'd like to thank you all for being here, even the candidates. Second of all, I'd like to say, I'd like people like Mr. Wool to pay attention. If men like me, military men, are showing up, you legislative people with experience are definitely failing the community. If they're asking me to show up, dude, you are messed up, okay? I'm just telling you that right now. You and Sarah Palin and all those people, they don't want you if they're asking guys like me to show up. And they're even paying my fees to show up, all right? And I'm not going to go without a paycheck. You should be giving me a bonus, like a $50,000 bonus, or even $100,000. That's what they do for the military people, okay? If you're not going to put me in Washington in June, you guys might as well learn how to speak Russian or Chinese. Okay, that's basically what's going to happen. And I'm not going to be joking about that. We have 60,000 people dead from opioid overdoses and fentanyl. That's unacceptable. We have COVID deaths that are unreal. And we had 4 million people die under the Obama-Biden administration as veterans from the overprescribing of opioids and the malpractice of the TBI at the VA. You have no health care whatsoever that I can see in Alaska that's acceptable. And unless someone gets there and builds a medical school, I don't even know what to say to you people. So good luck.
Thank you, Mr. Thistle. Up next, we have Silvio Pellegrini. You have the floor, sir, for 1.5 minutes.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to say thank you, Mr. Thistle, for everything. There's a lot of resemblance on duty and integrity and purpose. And it's one of the reasons why I'm running. Is when this office opened up, I felt a purpose and a need, just like I did when I was 16 years old, and I wanted to serve my nation. And this is me serving my nation in the same capacity, not because I feel like I need to or want to, but because I feel like I need to. And there's just way too much I feel like needs to be course corrected in Congress. But what you're hearing from me isn't rehearsed, isn't scripted. It's not vetted for political correctness or had some public affairs person review it for accuracy or what will get the best impact out of the people. But instead, I want you to hear from me and from the heart. And I want you to hear from the people I've met along my path in the last 2-3 weeks of my travels. I want you to hear from people, you know, like retired John Paul Jr., retired 82nd Airborne, Native Alaskan, who wants his land back, who wants the promises that Congress meant for him back in the 70s when he returned from Vietnam. Olivia from Fairbanks that wants mental health issues brought to the forefront. Or Amy, the beautician that's aspiring to be, that wants to change her careers and wants more avenues and paths to work her way to become a medical assistant. Or perhaps Matthew from Anchorage or Captain John. All these are people that I've met along my way that want to be heard, but they haven't been. They haven't been. They fall on deaf ears. Instead, we have people that we don't know what they're doing. They don't tell the public what they're doing. They don't update. We hear from C-SPAN and CNN what's going on in Congress, but we don't hear from our elected officials. I can't promise you the moon. I can't promise you the star. I can't promise you a thing and a gift, but I can promise you I will serve you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pellegrini. Up next, we have J.R. Myers for 1.5 minutes closing statement. Mr. Myers, you have the floor, sir.
All right. Well, I want to thank you, George, Ashlyn, and Cole, and all the other candidates for participating, because this is actually really democracy in action. It's something you can tell by the number of candidates. A lot of people have been bemoaning the fact there are so many candidates. I say it's like the dam broke, you know, this is all the pent up demand for the diversity of thought in the political marketplace that has been wanted for so long, for almost 50 years, you know. So this is, to me, a refreshing sign and invigoration of the political process. It's removing that power and that clout from the party bosses and it's handing it back to the people. The people did this for themselves. So it might need to be tweaked a little bit, but I think overall it's a good thing. I would ask for the people's vote so that I could be one of the top 4 candidates, because I think there's a lot more to talk about and we need more diverse opinions. We don't need just 3 or 4 Republicans in the top 4 or 3 Republicans and a Democrat. We need more than Pepsi and Coke. I want to implement the non-aggression principle, which is the libertarian principle of not initiating force against others to achieve political ends. I want that to start with the fetus in the womb. I want a life-affirming society. We need a culture of life, not a culture of death and hopelessness. So I intend on filing for the regular congressional election as well prior to the deadline. And again, elections need informed voter participation. Please get out, register, vote, learn about the candidates. Go to my website, johnrichardmyers.com, johnrichardmyers.com. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Myers. And Robert Bob Lyons, you are recognized for 1.5 minutes. You have the floor, sir.
Yes, hello. First, I'd like to start out just to tell Don Young's family that they're in my prayers and I respect the man outside of politics, just working anywhere for 50 years. That's a big duty. And the guy was a big thing in our state. He was a giant. And I voted for him plenty of times, as I'm sure plenty of people did. It's the only congressman I ever voted for, to be honest. So to move on from that, my website's alaskansvotebob.com. You can find me there. You can find me on the Facebook, GitterGad, Twitter, whatnot universe. Look for me, YouTuber. You can, I want you to know the main things I'm looking for. Individuals over entities. It's time that we need to put some humanity into what we do in our state and stop looking at just giving everything right to the individuals. So our entities, we need to do individuals over entities. Second Amendment defense, hunting, fishing, veterans, travel, health protections with our unique position being detached from the state or from the lower 48. And we can maybe work with Hawaii, work some stuff out. But really, I just want to get in there and change the trend and look for a more positive future and do the actual solutions-based, productive thing. Work with the other people, knock on the doors, see if you can actually create a way. Am I on?
Thank you. You're good. You have 3 seconds.
Oh, well, thank you. I wanted to thank all you guys too. 3 seconds. Perfect.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Lyons. And then Stephen Wright, do you have audio or do you want me to read what you put in the chat? Give me a thumbs up. It looks like he's saying for me to read it. Okay. So for Stephen Wright, our final candidate, he says, I have some audio issues and would like to finish up how I feel in my wrap up. I strongly support the American First agenda and look forward to serving Alaskans in Congress. I feel my military background and my ability to adapt to do the right thing. I believe I will be a great asset to the state of Alaska. I appreciate the opportunity I had today to express my concerns, and I look forward to working with the people of Alaska. As a pro-life conservative running in Alaska's lone congressional seat, vote for Stephen if you value integrity, service before self, and excellence in all I do. I have these core values that I have received. My website is Stephen Wright, alaska.weebly.com. Thanks for all that you do, UAA, UAS, and UAF, and God bless. So on that, on behalf of everyone here at the ASUAF and President Ashlyn Espinosa, our co-moderator, and Senate Chair Cole Osowski, our other co-moderator, thank you for participating in this, and good luck on the campaign trail out there, shaking hands and kissing babies. And we appreciate you for coming and participating in our ASUAF forum. So thank you very much, everyone.